Hey people, Zaniverse here. Last time we caught up, I was in the horrid wastelands of California, and I've decided that this is the time for me, as a YouTuber and a content creator, to tap into the one thing none of you can resist: nostalgia. Now, I'm back in the American food aisle from the first video, except this time it's Christmas. The zombies are still here, but they're different now, because this isn't a rehash. It's a sequel that focuses on giving you what you want, or at least that's what the studio thought. Let's go back in time just a little bit to 2006. Dead Rising burst into the scene the same way I burst a blood vessel in my head when I played Trials Fusion. I'm really bad at this game, okay? The original offered players a sandbox full of zombies, a truly expansive arsenal of weapons, and an ever-present ticking clock that added a real sense of urgency. Frank West, our war-covering photojournalist, became an instant fan favorite, not just for his ability to wield anything from a chainsaw to a park bench with lethal efficiency, but also because he was just a regular dude thrown into a chaotic situation. Fast forward to 2016, and Frank West is back for round 2, 3 technically, with Dead Rising 4. We've returned to Willamette, the site of the original outbreak, but this isn't the same mall we got our hands dirty in for the first time. The iconic mall has had quite the facelift, now having been expanded to be a sprawling, modernized megaplex decked out for the holiday season. Not just that, we can also leave the mall and explore Willamette and its surrounding areas too. On paper, it sounds like a true match made in heaven, but the game made some big changes to the established formula, and not many of them went over well with the fans. From the removal of the series' signature timer to the overhaul of Frank West himself. I've always thought to myself, well, why don't they do it again? And then ruin just about everything else. Luckily, I'm secretly a wizard, and Dead Rising 4 is the spell I cast on Capcom to deliver just that. So let's take a closer look at what Dead Rising 4 brought to the crafting bench, and where it may have lost its way. Let's go back to 2014, which was 10 years ago. No, I don't want to think about that. Dead Rising 3 did well, and Capcom was wondering if they should make another game, but the world was caught up in the whole reboot craze. And if Sony can just remake a game that's 9 years old, what's stopping Capcom from making a reboot of a game that came out 10 years ago? Well, that's what Capcom set out to do. Originally, Dead Rising 4 was going to be a reboot, and was codenamed Climber. Capcom saw how well the original Last of Us did, and they wanted to jump in on that third-person narrative storytelling, instead using their own zombie IP, Dead Rising. However, Capcom Japan wasn't having it, and they wanted a new Dead Rising game, one that continued the story of Frank West, since everyone loves him so much. So, Climber was scrapped in 2014 and work on what we now know as Dead Rising 4 began. They brought back Frank, but as a grumpy shell of his former self, and they also replaced his voice actor, swapping Terrence J. Rotolo for Ty Olsson, which the fans didn't take too kindly to. Fans broke out the big guns and started a petition. Yeah, that worked out great, didn't it? Anyway, with the series supposedly returning to its roots, did Capcom manage to woo the fans with the new game? Or is Frank's second trip to Willamette going to turn out to be worse than his first? When a return to Willamette was on the cards, the idea had fans buzzing with excitement. After all, that's where this wacky adventure began. The quintessential American town turned into the setting for one of the most iconic zombie games in history, as the original turned the mundane setting of a suburban shopping mall into an expansive sandbox where players were free to explore and turn anything they could get their hands on into a weapon. So naturally, the prospect of revisiting this location was a tantalizing one. But as you'll soon find out, you can't ever go home again. Not really. Willamette, in spite of its enlarged scale, is like a shadow of its former self, wrapped in some holiday cheer and stripped of any charm or tension that made the original so engaging. Sure, the town has grown, but the heart and soul of Willamette, that sense of claustrophobia, is gone as you navigated the mall's narrow corridors. The new mall is massive and too expansive to feel like a desperate struggle for survival, and more like a festive playground without any real stakes. The Christmas theme, while visually interesting, feels at odds with the tone of the series. I mean, I'm as much of a sucker for snow as the next guy, and Dead Rising has always had a certain level of absurdity, but it was also balanced with a sense of urgency. So, let's start with the most controversial change. The series' signature timer mechanic is entirely absent from this game. Turns out adding a timer like this is actually pretty challenging, as adding this requires a lot of playtesting by people of various skill, then figuring out the average time to beat the story, and then adding some additional time in order to let people explore the world, craft weapons, and do side content. It forced you to prioritize, to make tough decisions on the fly, and to live with the consequences of them. Do you save a survivor from a horde of zombies, or pretend you don't hear their screams of agony and mosey on down to the next main mission? So, the timer is gone, and with it, much of the tension that set the earlier games apart from the other horde of undead sandboxes. Now you can mindlessly wander through Willamette at your own pace, take in the sights, kill zombies, and loot stores without a care in the world. On the surface, it may seem like a good thing, as it makes the game more accessible, but what it really ended up doing is strip away a layer of depth. Without the constant pressure of the clock, the weight of every decision, and the cost of every mistake is largely nullified in order to appeal to a more casual audience. And unfortunately, this is just the first of many in a long line of baffling gameplay changes. let's talk combat, and the absolute nerfing of everything to do with it. Combat while controlling Frank honestly feels like you're hitting enemies with the equivalent of a wet paper towel. Most standard weapons, and hell, even some of the combo weapons, are no longer capable of performing one-shot kills. The kill combo counter has been replaced by a hit combo counter, and locked behind it are any weapon's heavy attack, greatly reducing the depth of combat, as you're no longer able to string together different attacks, until the game allows you to at least. The combo weapon system has also been changed. In previous entries, you needed 2 specific items, unless you unlocked the skills in Dead Rising 3, which allowed you to craft groups of weapons with items from specific types. For example, if you wanted to create the Pummel Blast, a sledgehammer with grenades at the end, you'd need a sledgehammer and a grenade initially. But if you bought the combo skill, you could craft it with any given blunt weapon and explosive. Dead Rising 4 lets you craft every combo weapon in the game with only half the items. So, to craft the Pummel Blast here, you'd need the sledgehammer and then any given explosive item. No skill required. This greatly reduces the difficulty of crafting, especially in the early game. Talking about combo weapons, they're back, and they're as weak as ever. They are half returning ones, accordingly nerfed and less fun as a result, and half new. These new ones are almost all Christmas themed too. And despite having 3 games to draw inspiration from, or hell, even straight up copy, Dead Rising 4 features 55 combo weapons. And as a reference, Dead Rising 3 had 105 of them. Seriously, I don't know what they did, but even after grinding all the way up to level 80, they still barely deal any damage, only being able to kill 2 to 3 zombies a hit. This greatly reduces the main drive of grinding for skill points, and leveling up as a whole in my opinion, as it never feels like Frank is getting any stronger in the long run, so why the fuck would I spend another 10 hours getting Frank to level 100? Oh yeah, that's right. The max level is now 100, for seemingly no other reason than to allow for this awfully bloated skill tree. Dead Rising 4's skill tree features 4 different branches for players to invest in. Brawling focuses on melee combat, increasing the odds of getting critical hits, and increasing the durability of both weapons and vehicles. Fortitude focuses on Frank's health and damage resistance, increasing his total health, the amount of health he regains from eating, and reducing the amount of damage you take from attacks. Shooting focuses on ranged weapons, such as increasing the chance of getting critical hits, increasing total ammunition, or, and I quote, greatly increasing the chance of getting critical hits. Real creative there, fellas. And lastly, survival focuses on Frank's resourcefulness, like increasing inventory space, giving Frank better sneaking, and increasing the amount of scrap retrieved from searchable objects. 107 different skills to unlock, and only about a quarter of them actually have any meaningful gameplay changes. This feels an awful lot like they tried to RPGify the franchise, with negligible stat boosts for most of these skills. Dead Rising 3's skill tree expansion was great, as you really felt Nick get stronger throughout the course of the game, while in this one, you just don't. Frank remains the same grumpy boomer he starts the game out as. He is however capable of carrying a metric shit ton of items, as he has 4 different inventories to choose from. Inventory management? Nah, that's way too confusing for me, as Frank can now carry up to 32 items at once. Gone are the days of inventory management, just mindlessly hoard anything you can get your hands on. The expanded inventory system significantly reduces the difficulty of inventory management compared to the previous entries in the series, as Frank can now have up to 8 slots for melee, ranged and thrown weapons, as well as 8 food items. While it is true that this gives players much more leniency, I can't help but feel this is just removing yet another hallmark of the franchise. In earlier entries, the limited inventory forced players to think about their loadout, balancing between weapons and life-saving healing items. This added a layer of strategy to the game, as players had to alter the contents of their inventory to whatever situation they found themselves in at the time. By contrast, 4 allowed players to carry a whole lot of everything without any restrictions, which diminishes tension, strategy, and resource management as a whole. The expanded inventory makes it easier to prepare for any situation, but it also means the sense of resource scarcity and the critical thinking that came along with it are entirely absent. The ways to get prestige points have also been completely gutted, in spite of having to go through double the amount of levels to hit the cap now. Zombie kills now reward 10 points for all weapon types. Vehicular kills now reward you with 2 points. 2! Fucking 2! There's barely even a point in using them anymore, but we'll get to those Beyblade fucks in a minute, just you wait. Aside from regular zombies, there's also 2 variants to encounter. Fresh zombies, which are fast and can tackle you with little to no warning, sometimes from outside of your view, and Evo zombies, that have more health and are a right pain to deal with. Side quests? Oh you fool, they're completely gone. Survivor boards also went up in smoke because of this. There are some random encounters for you to complete, which always spawn in the same set locations. These range from saving a survivor from a group of zombies, to saving a survivor from a group of soldiers. Upon saving the survivor, you'll get some prestige, a combo weapon, and maybe some scrap. Afterwards, they'll just aimlessly stand around in a safe house. Saving a set amount of survivors will also level up the corresponding safe house, and each new level unlocks some new items at the vendors inside. Aside from zombies, there's 2 other enemy types. hostile survivors who have been diagnosed with a case of the crazies after realizing they're indeed part of Dead Rising 4, and obscurus forces who have been diagnosed with generic military faction syndrome number 177,392. Psychopaths return in the form of yet another hollow shell of themselves, now dubbed maniacs. I suppose Capcom received too many mean letters from federal prisons. These entirely optional boss fights now come with all the cringe and none of the charm of the previous entries in the series. What made the psychopaths so good in the other games is the fact that they were fleshed out characters with tragic backstories and motivations, whether it be greed, fear, or vanity. Hell, in most cases, there were good people caught in a bad situation. Adam the Clown became a psychopath after witnessing his circus fall apart due to the outbreak. Cliff the Vietnam War veteran lost his mind after witnessing his family die in the outbreak. And Ted just wanted to feed his damn tiger. Dead Rising 3 alone blows this game's maniacs out of the water. 3 had you get chased around by a comically obese woman on a mobility scooter inside of a restaurant because you dared asking if you could take some of her food. 4 is a guy that's dressed up like Santa, and he kills people. 3 had you fight a gimp fanatic that attacked you with a golden flamethrower in the shape of his cock. Oh no! 4 has a guy that's dressed like a pirate captain, and he kills people. 3 has you haul ass around a massive mansion to disable security measures, while taking out gun-toting drones, and when confronting the guy in the basement, he gets a heart attack, shits himself, and dies. 4 is a guy that's dressed like a turkey. Oh, and he kills people. Can you notice the theme here? Dead Rising 4 genuinely just feels like the devs got a slap on the wrist by the publisher after 3. Like they were having too much fun, so they had to dial everything way the fuck back. Everything feels weaker, certain combo weapons don't even do one-shot kills sometimes, and whatever they tried adding in to make it more fun ended up falling flat on its face. Like the EXO Suits for example, another new addition. These robotic upgrades make Frank a human tank for all of 90 seconds, after which it spontaneously breaks. Wouldn't want to catch you having too much fun now, would we? Combo vehicles also make their return, but they too have been absolutely nerfed into oblivion. They're less fun to make, are not as efficient at dispatching hordes of the undead, are prone to breaking, and I don't know if it's because of all the snow on the roads, but vehicles handle the same way this sound effect sounds. Additionally, there's only 8 of them in the game, and even less of them are actually worth using. Further evidence of the no fun allowed policy, I suppose. Cars will randomly launch into the air, turn into a Beyblade, or straight up just get flung across town. What the fuck, man? I just fucking flew across town, bro. I swear, man, this game is a fucking social experiment designed to test my fucking patience. This happens for every single vehicle in the game. Now not to this extent, usually, but still enough for me to get persistently annoyed by it. Each vehicle now has a health bar, though you'll most likely be flipped over long before reaching the end of it. Weapon lockers also have been completely removed, but hey, now you can use an out-of-place currency to buy whatever you need from the safe houses. Isn't this fun? No! Dead Rising 4's narrative attempts to revisit some of the original's most iconic elements while introducing new twists and characters, but whether it comes together in a satisfying way is definitely up for debate. Let's start with the main man himself, Frank West. Fans hearing Frank could potentially return was exciting to say the least, as he's been the face of the franchise since its inception. But this Frank is no longer the grizzled veteran we came to know and love, as he's more cynical, more sarcastic, and more, well, meta. He's constantly cracking jokes, breaking the fourth wall, and snapping selfies with zombies, because that's a thing now. It's a Frank that's been updated for the age of social media, but in the process, he's definitely lost some of the depth that made him relatable. Changing voice actor didn't do them any favors either. Ty Olsson definitely brings a new energy to the role, and while it's far from an unsalvageable performance, it's just different. It's like running into an old friend from high school. You know them, but do you really? He's still the Frank who's covered wars, but he's also someone that seems more interested in taking the perfect selfie, rather than uncovering the truth behind the outbreak. The story kicks off with Frank being dragged out of semi-retirement by one of his students, Vic Chu, who convinces him to investigate a new military base in Willamette. What starts as a standard investigation quickly spirals into another full-blown zombie outbreak, because of course it does. Before long, Frank finds himself back into the thick of things, battling the undead, uncovering a government conspiracy, and dealing with a host of new enemies. We pick up with Frank and Vic driving to Willamette, with the latter tricking Frank into thinking they were going to play minigolf at 8 PM. Minigolf at 8 PM? I know Frank is older in this game, but this is like senile levels of cognitive impairment. After arriving at the base, collecting a keycard, and beating a man to death, we sneak into the compound. Only a few moments later, I fall through the floor however. I suppose the state-of-the-art military facility has the structural integrity of soggy bread. After killing a zombie, finding a weapon, and killing some more zombies, we make it to a high-tech experimentation room where we get our first investigation. These are a new minigame type activity that occurred at set points in the story. during which you'll need to take some photographs of some points of interest. A little later, Frank and Vic come across some lady suffering inside of a cell. Frank urges her to leave it alone, but Vic decides to off the zombie, very loudly. This of course puts the entire base on high alert for intruders. Frank fights his way out of the base, only to find Vic leaving him behind right at the end. You'd think this would have had some long-term ramifications or consequences, but no, Frank just kinda shrugs it off and changes his name to Hank East. Cut to 4 months later, and Frank is teaching journalism somewhere in the Midwest, but he's found and confronted by the new commander of the ZDC, Brad Park. Finally, a character from a good game. Brad informs Frank of the new Willamette outbreak, that it's been going on for 6 weeks, and that Frank's student Vic is already on the case, trying to expose the truth. We fly into Willamette, but as is custom with helicopters in the Dead Rising franchise, we get shot out of the sky and crash into the new Willamette Mall. After dealing with the first horde of zombies, we make our way over to a nearby hotel before dealing with some obscure soldiers. By this point, you might have noticed that all of the zombies look exactly the same. Turns out that this was a cosmetic DLC that is automatically turned on at launch, and not just yet another misguided creative decision. Rest assured, you'll see the sea of green turn into a sea of yellow and red in a bit. Frank makes his way to the mall zombie shelter, and after dealing with the fresh infected, he has a look through Vic's clues to discover what she's found out so far. Frank discovers that the outbreak started at the mall's entrance, so that's where we're headed next. On the way, we make our way through a medieval themed part of the mall and deal with the gang of role players that reside within. I make it to the entrance, investigate a quarantine area before running into a guy called Darcy, who tells us that there's a podcaster that's also been investigating Obscurus. Frank goes to the garage and gets told how to make combo vehicles, and after a little, I make it to City Hall and get acquainted with Paula, the aforementioned podcaster. After another investigation, she tells us that there's an Obscurus sniper camped out nearby. I go over to interrogate him, but find him nailed to a wall instead. How unfortunate. Upon investigating, I discover a panic room and a small mountain of tranquilizer darts. These guys are hunting more than rabbits, that's for sure. I also catch a transmission from some Obscurus goons who are falling back to a nearby fire station. Once I get there, I clear out the zombies and investigate once again. Afterwards, I go to the junkyard, another Obscurus operations base. After sneaking inside, it's revealed that Vic is working with the mercenaries, ratting out survivors in order to further her own interests. After getting caught, we deal with the goons, and Paula tells us that they took Darcy over to Westridge, so we give chase. Frank goes to Westridge, but ends up getting a trank dart in his neck before waking up in the Resistance fighter base, led by Tom, who is indeed bald. Never trust bald people! He tells us Frank has to help defeat Obscurus, but Frank wants into the dam as a reward, as that's where the clues lead next. I go find Hammond as a favor to Tom, and after saving her and some other guys, she informs us about the service door around the back of the dam, which should let us inside. Frank makes his way over to the dam, and after defeating the Obscurus forces there, discovers that they managed to capture the creature they've been hunting. But it doesn't seem to have gone exactly to plan, as we can find the convoys strewn about the entire town. Once I get to the end of the carnage, I find the sole survivor. After giving him some morphine, I follow the wreckage down a tunnel and into the sewers. After getting down there, I come across the first Evos, who are zombies that have retained some of their intelligence. Frank deals with them before being contacted by Blackburn, the leader of Obscurus' research. She tells Frank she can give him vital information if we arrange a helicopter ride out of the city within the next 48 hours. I go to meet her in Westridge, and after dealing with the soldiers keeping her hostage, end up having a run-in with Vic. She scolds us for only being after the truth, and Frank tells her she needs to be able to put her own morals aside. Blackburn tells us that this outbreak is based on research that's 15 years old, all the way back to the original outbreak, which of course is revealed to be none other than Dr. Barnaby, the old guy that died of an aneurysm. She tells us that there's a nearby vineyard that he uses as a front, and for us to investigate the cellar. Hey look, I fix the zombies. Once I get to the winery, I make my way downstairs and investigate Barnaby's lab before getting into the testing chamber. After investigating it, I go to meet up with Hammond again. After finding her, she tells us that Tom has gone off the deep end, seeing himself as judge, jury and executioner. Never trust bald people! She asks us to clear the nearby pool hall so the outcasts of his group have somewhere to stay. After doing so, Frank meets Hammond outside of a military base, and after blowing a hole in the wall, we sabotage some equipment. Once I get into the main facility, I track down the research that Obscurus stole from Barnaby's lab. While doing so, I come across a recording of some Obscurus soldiers finding the lab under the winery. While investigating, however, some of the wasps get loose, and it ends with Calder, an officer, getting trapped inside of the testing chamber with some of the wasps, resulting in the first intelligent zombie. When trying to leave, Frank has a run-in with Fontana, the commander of Obscurus. Before we get to finish her off, we're interrupted by Calder, and Fontana tries to sacrifice herself by blowing them both up. It only results in one casualty, however, as Calder just shrugs it off. Afterwards, Frank escapes the base and has to go help out Hammond at a nearby shelter. After clearing it out, I talk to some of the survivors who tells us that she's been taken by Tom, so we head to his farm. Once I get there, I clear out the enemies and investigate Tom's secret room, before discovering that Tom took Hammond to a nearby cement factory in order to execute her. Frank goes there and fights his way to the top in order to have a showdown with Tom. After killing him, we ask Hammond to help defeat Calder. I head down to the train wreckage again, collect some explosives, and make my way deeper into the sewers. After a little, I come across Calder, communicating with a group of other evils. I collect Barnaby's hard drive, and after escaping from Calder, Frank attempts to transfer the hard drive's contents onto his camera, during which it's revealed that Barnaby was attempting to genetically engineer human immortality. Unfortunately, we get held up by Vic, who takes the camera from us, as she's still on her moral crusade of wanting to do things the right way. We of course give chase after her, and after a little we find her being taken down by Calder, who gives us a speech about how journalists are scum of the earth, only taking but never giving anything back. He might be onto something actually. We then chuck on an EXO suit and have a showdown with Calder, who we beat to death for an excruciatingly long amount of time. After defeating him, he lights a blaze. Leon did it better. Then Frank takes Vic back to the safe house, where the duo make up, agreeing to split the article 50-50 after Vic reveals she grabbed the SD card before Calder destroyed the camera, with the bonus of minigolf and a fist bump on top. Afterwards, Frank, Vic, and Brad fight their way through the mall and to the rooftop in order to get out of the city via helicopter. However, disaster strikes, as zombies grab onto Frank before he makes it onto the chopper, and he decides to sacrifice himself to save his friends. Vic honors him by publishing a truthful article, exposing the corruption within the government. Now, this was ending... Oh, there's only one ending. This time around, the military is much more heavily involved, and their constant presence adds a new layer of tension to the narrative. The government conspiracy angle is a familiar one for the series, but Dead Rising 4 doesn't quite manage to bring anything new to the table. It's a plot we've seen before, and while it serves as a functional backdrop for the zombie mayhem, it lacks the impact of earlier games. Vic Chu, Frank's protege turned antagonist, is one of the new faces in this installment. She's ambitious, driven, and willing to go to great lengths to get her story, qualities that put her at odds with Frank. Throughout the game, Vic serves as a foil to Frank, representing a new generation of journalists who are more concerned with ethics than sensationalism. It's an interesting dynamic, but one that feels underdeveloped, which isn't that hard, seeing as the main story is only about 8 hours long. Vic's motivations are clear, but her character arc doesn't have the depth needed to make her a truly compelling adversary. A majority of the people you come across in this game are closer to cardboard cutouts rather than actual fucking characters. Half of them don't even have anything to do in the story, just standing around safe houses doing nothing. And the other half serve their purpose in perpetually harassing you over the radio, through dialogue that's delivered with the personality of a hospital brochure, and the enthusiasm of a church service. Hell, Dr. Barnaby is one of the most influential characters in this game, and he's been dead for a fucking decade at this point. This lack of depth makes it hard to invest in the narrative fully, especially when compared to the more fleshed out characters from earlier games. However, I wasn't free of this agonizing experience just yet, as Capcom were kind enough to grace us with 3 DLCs after release. The first one of these was Frank Rising, a story-based DLC that serves as a definitive ending to Dead Rising 4. The main game ends on a semi-cliffhanger, with Frank seemingly meeting his end. However, Capcom doesn't have the guts to kill their face of the franchise, and thus he survives, having been infected with the zombie virus and turning into another intelligent zombie, as the DLC follows his struggle to find a cure before fully succumbing to the infection. The DLC's gameplay is markedly different from the base game. As an infected Frank, players gain new, more zombie-like abilities. He can now feast to regain health, pounce onto distant enemies, and unleash powerful screams to knock over zombies. Frank also has an entirely new skill tree, which does actually change gameplay by giving you new abilities, unlike the main game's one. You can take on challenges in order to unlock new abilities and skills. These range from killing a group of looters or collecting a bunch of pheromones within a set amount of time. You can also get your hands on collectibles, ranging from organ containers to research papers, in order to unlock even more abilities. The DLC starts off with us waking up on the rooftop and getting familiar with our powers by feasting on some survivors as they're occupied trying to deal with hordes of the undead. But after a little, we get mercilessly gunned down by Hammond, who doesn't seem too bothered by the fact that we've been turned into a brainbiter. Blackburn, however, insists that Frank could be the cure to immortality. After getting out of the room, she tells us that the Pentagon knows that Obscure's messed up, and that they're planning to bomb the city. Oh, so now we get a fucking clock. Frank makes his way through the mall, and makes his way to Calder's smoky corpse in order to absorb the swarm inhabiting his body. Afterwards, Frank makes his way around town, collecting painkillers, a control key, solenoids, a bottle of hard liquor, and Blackburn's research notes from a nearby bus depot. I then head to the school in Westridge to take out a pack of Evos to collect their wasps, including a Royal Evo, so I can get my hands on a queen. Frank then heads to Tom's farm in order to meet up with Hammond, but while filling her in on the situation, we get interrupted by Obscurus, having been betrayed by Blackburn, as she'd prefer to get the scientific credit for making the superior human, rather than actually curing Frank. After defeating them, Frank heads to the winery and clears out the last of Obscurus' soldiers inside, before making Blackburn cure him by doing a whole bunch of sciencey stuff and coming out as a new man. But it wasn't without sacrifice, as Hammond and the rest of the survivors died protecting the winery, leaving Frank and Blackburn as the only 2 survivors. Afterwards, Frank retired and disappeared from the public space, never telling the tale of his time as a zombie and plagued by nightmares until his death. Now this was actually not the best ending, so I played through the whole thing again in order to get a slightly different ending cutscene. The DLC has a darker, more urgent tone to the story, contrasting with the lighter, more humorous aspects of the main game. It also provides some closure to the cliffhanger ending of Dead Rising 4, albeit in a somewhat rushed and not entirely satisfying manner. While Frank Rising was appreciated for its unique take on gameplay and its effort to expand the story, it was criticized for its short length and for the fact that it made the true ending of the game something players had to purchase separately, something that didn't sit well with many fans. Super Ultra Dead Rising 4 Mini Golf is exactly what it sounds like, a mini golf game set within the world of Dead Rising. It's bizarre, and it's about as far removed from the main game's tone as you can get. The DLC allows players to play through a series of mini golf courses scattered throughout Willamette, complete with zombies acting as obstacles. Gameplay is relatively straightforward. You play mini golf, trying to sink your ball in as few strokes as possible while navigating a variety of zombie-infested courses. Each course is filled with environmental hazards, undead enemies, and of course, power-ups that allow you to spice up your game. Players earn Zenny while playing, which they can use to unlock and customize various aspects of their character, ranging from clubs to balls. I found it enjoyable for about 5 minutes, as does the majority of other players, judging by the achievement unlock rate. And lastly, Capcom Heroes was a free update for Dead Rising 4. It's a DLC that reimagines Dead Rising 4 in a new light. The DLC allows players to replay the base game story with a twist. Frank can now don various outfits that transform him into famous characters from Capcom's expansive catalog of games. Each outfit grants Frank special abilities inspired by the character he's dressed as. Ryu from Street Fighter can perform Hadoukens, while Mega Man X lets you use the Mega Buster. Capcom Heroes was generally well received for its fun and lighthearted approach. It's a love letter to Capcom fans, packed with references and Easter eggs that reward players familiar with the company's history. Though I'll be honest, I didn't keep playing once I realized that this was just a base game with some power-ups tacked on. Regardless, it's a great example of a DLC that doesn't take itself too serious, instead focus on delivering pure, unadulterated fun. When Dead Rising 4 hit the shelves in December of 2016, it was met with a mixture of indifference and skepticism. The return of Frank West, the iconic setting of Willamette, and the promise of holiday-themed carnage were all tantalizing prospects for long-term fans of the series. But as the dust settled and the initial excitement wore off, it became clear that Dead Rising 4 was not the triumphant return that many had hoped for. The fan reaction was as mixed as a zombie horde. Some embraced the changes, while others felt the game had taken a wrong turn at the North Pole. One of Dead Rising 4's biggest challenges was trying to appeal to two very differing audiences. The die-hard fans who had stuck with the series since its inception, and the new players who were just being introduced to it. Capcom attempted to make the game more accessible to a broader audience, but in doing so, they made some changes that didn't sit too well with veterans. For longtime fans, the removal of the timer was a particularly bitter pill to swallow, as it had been a cornerstone of the Dead Rising experience, creating a sense of tension and urgency that made every decision feel meaningful. Its absence was seen as a betrayal of the series' roots by many fans. Additionally, the game's focus on particularly mindless action, simplified combat, toned-down difficulty, and the lack of real psychopaths all contributed to the feeling that this entry had strayed too far from what made the earlier games so memorable. On the other hand, new players found themselves having fun with a more accessible entry point into the series. The removal of the timer, controversial as it may be, made the game more approachable, allowing them to explore Willamette at their own pace without the constant pressure of the clock. The game's critical reception mirrored the fan reaction quite well. Lukewarm to say the least. Most outlets and other creators criticized the game's lack of timer, challenge, and simplified gameplay, all being seen as steps backward for the series. I know that hindsight is 2020, but the outlets that gave this game an 8 or 9 out of 10 must have been blinder than Stevie Wonder. Looking back, it's clear that Dead Rising 4 tried to strike a balance between old and new, but didn't quite succeed in pleasing either side. The changes to core gameplay elements, while intended to make the game more accessible, ended up alienating a significant portion of the fanbase. Reflecting on Dead Rising 4, it's clear that the game represented a turning point in the series. A moment where the franchise attempted to reinvent itself for a new generation of players, while trying to stay true to the spirit that made it a cult classic. The result, however, was a game that left fans divided and critics lukewarm. A festive experiment that dared to be different, but didn't quite manage to capture the magic of its predecessors. The decision to recast Frank with a new voice actor and give him a more comedic, self-aware personality was a bold move, but it also alienated many longtime fans. This new Frank was starkier, more meta, and more focused on taking selfies with zombies than uncovering the truth behind the outbreak. Frank's return to Willamette, the setting of the original Dead Rising, was meant to evoke nostalgia and bring the series full circle. But the Frank we got in Dead Rising 4 wasn't the same Frank that fans had come to love. Frank's transformation is emblematic of the broader changes in Dead Rising 4, a game that tried to modernize the franchise by embracing more casual, action-oriented gameplay and a lighter tone. In doing so, it left behind some of the elements that had made the earlier games so unique. The tension of the timer, the complexity of research management, and the dark, often tragic humor that ran through the series. The decision to set Dead Rising 4 during Christmas was another bold choice that set the game apart from its predecessors. The holiday theme gave the game a unique visual identity, with its festive decorations, holiday music, and Christmas-themed weapons adding adding a layer of dark humor to the zombie carnage. But the holiday setting also contributed to the game's total inconsistency. The festive atmosphere, while fun and visually striking, clashed with the darker elements of the story. The result was a game that at times felt like it was unsure of what it wanted to be, a horror game with holiday cheer, or a holiday game with a side of horror. Additionally, every radio song inside of the game's vehicles was Christmas themed, which just led to me muting the game entirely while I was grabbing some footage post-story. It's clear that Dead Rising 4 was a game that tried to do too many things. It was a game that attempted to modernize the Dead Rising formula for a new audience while retaining the elements that had made the series a success in the first place. But in trying to please everybody, they ended up pleasing nobody. As the last main entry in the series, Dead Rising 4 left fans of the franchise with a bad taste in their mouth. The game's mixed reception and the closure of Capcom Vancouver in 2018 have cast doubt on the future of the series, until now at least. So, as we close the book on Dead Rising 4, let's raise a glass of spiked eggnog to Frank West and the merry mess he made in Willamette. Here's hoping that, whatever the future holds for the series, it finds a way to recapture the magic that made Dead Rising a cult classic. 4 EXO Suits out of 10. Hey there, thanks so much for watching till the end of this video. If you enjoyed, leave a like, a comment and subscribe, as I have 251 more reviews to make between now and the inevitable heat of the universe. Follow me on Twitter and join the Discord. I've been Xeniverse, and I'm off to investigate a distress call from a nearby hospital.